Are we doomed to face a nuclear war in 2024? This is what Anunnaki expert Zecharia Sitchin believed and prophesied in his last book, The End of Days. Sitchin claimed that hidden within the ancient text of Sumer and Babylon lay an Anunnaki prophecy foretelling of a nuclear war in 2024 AD. Sitchin published a series of books over the span of 3 decades, starting in the 70s, titled the Earth Chronicles, which were to be the source, influence, and knowledge base for all of the later Anunnaki-based information and entertainment so commonly known to us today. To understand why he believed we were destined to face a nuclear war in 2024, we need to understand his view of the ancient text involving the Anunnaki and how they relate to modern religion and society. The Anunnaki were the gods worshipped by the peoples of the earliest civilizations like the Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. To Zecharia Sitchin, the pre-biblical text involving the Anunnaki were the origin of the Old Testament and Judeo-Christian mythologies. He makes this argument all throughout his Earth Chronicles series. For example, in this quote here, "The biblical tale of the deluge, starting in chapter 6 of Genesis, ascribes its conflicting aspects to a sole deity, Yahweh, who at first is determined to wipe mankind off of the face of the earth, and then goes out of his way to save it through Noah and the ark. The earlier Sumerian sources of the tale ascribe the disaffection with mankind to the god Enlil, and the counter-effort to save mankind to the god Enki. What the Bible glossed over for the sake of monotheism was not just the disagreement between Enlil and Enki, but a rivalry and a conflict between two clans of Anunnaki that dominated the course of subsequent events on Earth." Sitchin not only believed that the ancient texts of the ancient Middle East and Near East were responsible for the Judeo-Christian holy text, but he also believed that history is cyclical and that we are destined to undergo repeated sequences of divine revelation and judgment, as he relates in this quote. "Inherent in this cyclical plan of history is the concept of God as an everlasting divine entity who had been present at the beginning when heaven and earth were created, and who will be there at the end of days when his kingdom shall be renewed upon his holy mount. It is expressed in repeated statements from the earliest biblical assertions through the latest prophets." But even more interesting than this, Sitchin believed that the cyclical nature of God's wrath and judgment upon the people was mostly impressed upon us by the occasional and devastating return of a rogue planet named Nibiru, the planet from which the Anunnaki came from. Throughout his series, he presents his case for this more intriguing and popular theory of his involving Nibiru, the planet of the Anunnaki. This planet, we are told, crosses paths with our solar system every 3,600 years. Sitchin believed that the return of planet Nibiru was the cause of climatic turmoil, socio-political unrest, and prophetic changes. Sitchin points out that this celestial event is reflected in the Old Testament by the prophets of the 7th century BC. Among these important prophets, Amos, Isaiah, Hosea, and Habakkuk, was the telling of what is known as the Day of the Lord. This event is to be the return of what the prophets called the Lord, which at face value is to mean God, but to Sitchin, this might have meant something much different. Strange enough, during this event, the Day of the Lord, we are told by the prophets to expect natural disasters and anomalies. For example, in Isaiah 13, we are given a glimpse of what to expect and are told that on that day, the stars of heaven and its constellations shall not give their light, the sun shall be darkened at its rising, and the moon shall not shine its light. The heavens shall be agitated, and the earth in its place will be shaken, when the Lord of hosts shall be crossing on the day of his wrath. This day, the return of the Lord, Sitchin proclaims, is the return of the rogue planet Nibiru. Sitchin points out a harrowing correlation to Isaiah's description of the Lord's return with an ancient Sumerian text titled the Enuma Elish. The Enuma Elish is the Sumerian cosmological tale which speaks about how our solar system was created. The tale is told through an epic with the planets represented as gods fighting among each other. The protagonist, Marduk, as told in the Babylonian version, is later triumphantly named Nibiru, a star that crosses the heavens and shepherds the gods. Isaiah specifically states that the Lord of hosts shall be crossing on the day of his wrath. Isaiah's words, which eerily resemble those of the Enuma Elish, were evidence for Sitchin of knowledge of an event long forgotten by us, but respected and revered by our ancestors. Sitchin admired the Bible and believed in its proclamation of God being the Alpha and Omega, and that God shall stand throughout time in the beginning and end of all things, as he states here. Indeed, the basis for prophecy was the belief that the end was anchored in the beginning, that the future could be predicted because the past was known, if not to man, then to God. I am the one who from the beginning tells the end, Yahweh said in Isaiah 46:10. This belief, which is restated in the Psalms, in Proverbs, and in the book of Job, was viewed as a universal divine plan for the whole earth and all its nations. The prophet Isaiah, envisioning the earth's nations gathered to find out what is in store, described them asking each other, "Who among us can tell the future by letting us hear the first things?" That this was a universal tenet is shown in a collection of Assyrian prophecies when the god Nabu told the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, "The future shall be like the past." Sitchin's prophecy of a nuclear war in 2024 centers around the idea of Nibiru's cyclical return, the causing of the end of the Sumerian civilization, and the mysterious younger Anunnaki, Marduk, who was so controversial among the rest of the gods for being hell-bent on wanting to gain control of the Anunnaki throne. Before we can analyze Sitchin's claims for 2024, we have to further understand Marduk's role in the prophecy. Sumer, home of the Sumerians, was uncovered beneath the sands of time in the 1800s by adventurous men such as J.S. Buckingham and Sir Henry Layard. The Sumerian formed the first basic government, education systems, agriculture, mathematics, geometry, arts, astrology, mythology, literature, language, and intricate writing styles. Sumer was situated in what is now known as Iraq, in the Middle East, or Mesopotamia, meaning land between the two rivers, titled so by the Greeks. During Sumer's prime, there were 12 city-states, starting with Kish. Sumer's entire history surrounds a struggle for central power. No one person was able to unify all of Sumer long enough to sustain itself against the evolving world around it. Eventually, Sumer was ravished by another nomadic group of peoples known as the Gudians. They were aggressive barbarians that leveled the kingdom's capital. That would be the beginning of the end for our Sumerian ancestors, who would later face a series of events that would lead to their demise. In what is known as the Lamentation of Ur, written around 2000 BC, the Sumerians bewail what they call the evil wind. This evil wind swept over the land and decimated its agriculture and people, causing a regression of life, as is seen here in this Oxford translation. The storm that annihilates the land roars below. The people groan. The evil wind, like a rushing torrent, cannot be restrained. The text goes on to speak about a devastating scene where Sumer is destroyed in flames, buildings are toppled, and bodies are lying everywhere. Like a flood storm, it completely destroyed the city. The storm that annihilates the land silenced the city. The storm that will make anything vanish came doing evil. On its boulevards, where festivals had been held, heads lay scattered. In all its streets, where walks had been taken, corpses were piled. In its places, where the dances of the land had taken place, people were stacked in heaps. They made the blood of the land flow down like copper or tin. Its corpses, like fat, left in the sun, melted away of themselves. After this occurrence, the Sumerian people and their culture faded away into obscurity as they were overtaken by the encroaching kingdoms of the New World. To historians and geologists, this evil wind that wiped out what was left of the Sumerian people was a severe drought that had destructive side effects. To Zecharia Sitchin, this evil wind was nuclear fallout brought about by a power struggle between two opposing Anunnaki factions. The Sumerian mythology of the Anunnaki details the adventures and operations of various gods, all belonging to a complex family tree headed by the father god Anu. Anu's two immediate sons, Enki and Enlil, were given separate positions within the kingdom of the Anunnaki. Their brotherhood was challenged by a contention for the throne of their father. Their rivalry would continue through their children, who also wanted an eventual spot on the throne. The power struggle between the younger gods, primarily Marduk and Ninurta, would lead to the destruction of the Anunnaki power structure and human civilization. Marduk was the heir of the throne under Enki, whereas Ninurta was the heir under Enlil. However, it was the Enlilite lineage that was given the right to succession for the throne. It was this political decision that would fuel Marduk's march towards world domination, as Sitchin explains. Overshadowing all was the determination of Marduk to undo the injustice done to his father, Enki, when under the succession rules of the Anunnaki, not Enki but Enlil was declared the legal heir of their father Anu, the ruler on their home planet Nibiru. This bitter rivalry between the younger gods would prove to be destructive for everyone involved, including us humans. The first Armageddon we faced, caused by Anunnaki rivalry, according to Sitchin, occurred in 2024 BC, with the nuclear bombing of a Marduk stronghold by two young Anunnaki. To Sitchin, this nuclear bombing was retold in the Old Testament as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. At the time, God was to destroy the two cities for being sinful. In the story, Abraham pleads with God in an attempt to spare their lives. In the tale, God declares that none should be spared, and that Abraham should hurry and take his family out of that place so that they can be saved from the fiery destruction soon to take place. Interestingly though, it's not actually God who convenes on the matter directly. 3 angels are sent to warn Abraham of the matter, as is told in Genesis. These angels, however, appear as men. They warn Abraham that they were sent to judge Sodom and Gomorrah, to decide whether or not to destroy it. According to Sitchin's theory of the Anunnaki influence on the Bible, these so-called humanoid angels were none other than Anunnaki gods modestly coming to destroy enemy lands by command. Abraham was specifically met by 3 angels who told him that they were sent to judge and destroy the cities. Sitchin links the story in the Bible to what is known as the Era and Ishum text, also known as the Era epic. It is a Babylonian epic written in Akkadian, with its oldest manuscripts dated from at least the 7th century BC. It is a tale of war and destruction, specifically of cities and its people who are disruptive and found useless to Era. Era is the main character in the story, along with his companion Ishum and the supporting character Marduk. Era, as has been concluded by many scholars in the field of Mesopotamian studies, is another name for the famed god Nergal. Sitchin makes the claim that Ishum is another name for the Sumerian god Ninurta. In the epic, it is these 2 gods who contemplate on destroying the cities of their rival Marduk. Throughout the tablets, Era is pacing and pondering, trying to convince himself to go forth with his plans of destruction. Throughout the soliloquies, Era turns to Ishum for advice. Now, where Sitchin sees this story as a precedent to the Sodom and Gomorrah story is in a section where Ishum intervenes in Era's contemplation, just as Abraham did so with the angels, attempting to stop the madness from ensuing. Era is annoyed by Ishum's hesitancy to save the people in a last-ditch effort. Eventually, Era is convinced of his evil urge and sets out to destroy the cities of Babylon belonging to Marduk, destroying them in a flash, leaving everything desolate, as is told here. I will make Marduk angry, stir him from his dwelling, and lay waste the people. Ill winds rose, and the bright daylight was turned to gloom. The clamor of the peoples throughout the land was stilled. The 2 gods, Era and Ishum, are viewed by Sitchin to be the 2 angels who enter the city of Sodom, who consult with Abraham's nephew Lot, as is seen in Genesis 19. Sitchin claims that the bombing of Marduk's enemy territory caused nuclear fallout that drifted towards Sumer, which created the evil wind spoken of in the Sumerian text, which brought about their demise. Sitchin presents some modern evidence suggesting that this was so, as he writes, an international group of 7 scientists from different disciplines wrote an article titled Climate Change and the Collapse of the Akkadian Empire, Evidence from the Deep Sea, published in the scientific journal Geology in its April 2000 issue. Their research used radiological and chemical analysis of ancient dust layers from that period obtained from various Near Eastern sites, but primarily from the bottom of the Gulf of Oman. Their conclusion was that an unusual climate change in the areas adjoining the Dead Sea gave rise to dust storms, and that the dust, an unusual atmospheric mineral dust, was carried by the prevailing winds over southern Mesopotamia all the way beyond the Persian Gulf. The very pattern of Sumer's evil wind, carbon dating the unusual fallout dust, led to the conclusion that it was due to an uncommon dramatic event that occurred near 4,025 years before the present. That, in other words, means near 2025 BC, the very 2024 BC indicated by us. Now, being that Sumer was the beginning of our modern world, which was already destroyed by righteous judgment, in Sitchin's view, that area will also be the subject to the ending of our modern world by righteous judgment. This righteous judgment will be brought about by the cyclical return of planet Nibiru, the return of the Anunnaki, and a final war to end all wars. Interestingly enough, it was the god Ninurta who bombed Marduk's stronghold, which caused the nuclear fallout. Ninurta's emblem was the double-headed eagle, the very same symbol that was used by Rome and now Russia. Marduk's symbol was the snake dragon, a symbol frequently described throughout the Bible, specifically in the book of Revelation. Will there be a nuclear World War III between Europe and Mystery Babylon? Who is Mystery Babylon? And is Marduk still the driving force behind it, awaiting the return of Nibiru to strike? We will find out soon.